Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Flavor of the Week, brought to you by Banditos, fresh, made daily. In Flavor of the Week, Kyle sits down with one of our local priests over 4 different episodes to sample variations of a favorite food or drink while they discuss the ins and outs of life as a priest.
This is Kyle Hyman. I am here with Monsignor Owen Campion here at the Our Sunday Visitor headquarters of the United States. Thanks for being here, Monsignor.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
We have Flavor of the Week, Part 1, and ever since the first episode of the show, we sit down with a priest over 4 episodes, talk about his priesthood, his journey of faith, and we do something flavor related, something food or drink related. And you said, oh, we don't need to do that. We could just talk.
Well, either way.
Well, either way is perfect because I brought a couple things just in case if you were open to the flavors.
All right.
I have brought 3 options for you. Behind door number 1, we have 4 different types of rice cakes.
Okay.
Have you ever had rice cakes?
Yes, I have.
They're kind of like flavored air. This is an assorted array of fruit snacks.
Yeah.
So it's got different flavors of fruit gummies. And then I have 4 different flavors of chocolate. So let's talk a little bit about your journey to the priesthood. Now, not from around here. You grew up in Nashville,
Yes.
Tennessee. And what was your family like, and what drew you to the priesthood?
Well, first of all, I was born in Nashville.
Uh-huh.
And shortly after my birth, my father was inducted in the Second World War. So he was a certified public accountant. And so the Army sent him to Washington to the Pentagon. And he was in the Pentagon the entire war. So we lived in Washington. We moved up to be with him. So my first 4 years of life were in Washington.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, I have very few memories. Most of the memories I have are what my parents told me about it.
Sure.
I suppose one thing that I don't know how it had an impact upon a 4-year-old boy, but Sunday Mass was so important to them. And, of course, I don't think I would have noticed this at the time, but a problem that they had was getting gasoline because of the wartime rationing.
Uh-huh.
The average citizen could buy 3 gallons a week, can you imagine?
Yeah, and you had like tickets or...
You had little coupons.
Yeah.
So anyway, neither mother nor dad had any kind of privileged ranking. So that's all they could buy. It was 3 gallons of gasoline a week. There was a grocery store about a block away, so I guess there was a drugstore down there too, whatever. Uh-huh. That was not that much of an issue about going to the grocery. But they saved the gas until Sunday came around. And here they were in Washington with all of its monuments and landmarks, but they couldn't go see them because they couldn't get the gas to drive the car. So on Sunday, they would go to the Jefferson Memorial, but they would choose a church in the district, as it's called, to go to Mass.
Uh-huh.
But it was always revolving around Mass. So they first would find a church. Of course, there were churches where we lived. We were in a parish. But they would find a church near one of the landmarks, and they would go there to Mass, and then on the way back home, they would look at the Washington Monument or the Capitol or whatever it was. I don't think that was one memory that I would have had that continued, of course, was that the importance of Sunday Mass.
Right.
Then the war ended, and we moved back to Nashville. Actually, it's rather interesting now to think about how quickly many soldiers were discharged. Dad was discharged in November. War ended in August. That's not a long time.
Yeah.
But we moved back, and finally they bought a home and so forth. I started to elementary school the following September in the first grade. And that began another process that was very important to me as far as religion goes. I was in the school for 8 years, first to through 8th grade. And all of my teachers were Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia. But they had tremendous effect upon me. The school was not that old to begin with, so there were only 11 students in my class, in the 8th grade class, which meant, by just necessity, we had a lot of personal attention from the sister who was the teacher. As it turned out, I had the same nun for 2 years. She taught us in the 7th grade, and then she was named principal of the school, which meant she taught the 8th grade. So we had her 2 years in a row. And she was Sister Mary Joseph. She was a very important factor in my life. In those 2 years, I would have been 13 and 14, I suppose. She was a very important factor. One thing that was another thing that happened providentially. She wanted the boys to be altar servers. So she didn't impose that upon us, but most of us, learned to be altar servers.
Sure.
And the routine was that when our turn came up, we served daily mass in the convent, and like 6 a.m. or something. So Mother and Dad would have to get up, at the crack of dawn and get me over there for mass. But that was, of course, with the convent. But then on the weekends, on Sunday, once again, as our turn came along, we would serve in the parish church. And I would say that was the first personal contact that I had with priests. The parish was very big, and so the pastor was a magnificent person, but he was busy about many things.
Sure.
We would see him, primarily celebrating Mass. But then once we were servers, we had some association with him because he would be the celebrant. He had about 4 associate pastors, but he would be the celebrant, and he would come in and talk to us. He was a magnificent man in every respect. Well, then I finished elementary school with a very positive impression of parochial schools and of nuns. I hear people now sometimes turn on television, and I'll hear somebody say what a dreadful experience parochial education was for them, how mean and tyrannical the sisters were and all that. I just can't relate to that. I just can't. I'm sure they're sincere.
Right.
But I just never, the sisters were our friends.
Yeah.
And they were never mean to us or anything like that. They were such marvelous models and efficient and good teachers and professional in every way and fine religious. So that was a positive experience. Then I was graduated from the 8th grade, and I went to the boys' high school in Nashville. As I recall now, there were even just some lessons about being enrolled there. I don't know whether I was enrolled yet, but the Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, was rendered in April of 1954. And so nobody knew exactly what it meant and exactly how it would play out. Well, in June, the first week of June, the bishop at the time announced that the parochial schools in Nashville would desegregate. It's very hard for people now, especially if they're not from the South, to know what a revolutionary moment that was.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My male classmates, there were 6 boys in the class. 2 did refuse to go to the Catholic schools because of the racial matter. But the other 4 of us did not. And, of course, it was just never an option for my parents that I'd go anywhere else. So then I got into the school, and that would have been another stage in awakening and formation and whatever. My high school, Father Ryan High School, was the first school in the former Confederacy to be desegregated. There was a lot of publicity about it, and not all favorable by any means. The principal was an extraordinary man, Father Francis Shea. Later went on to be Bishop of Evansville, Indiana, and died in Evansville.
Okay.
But he was remarkable, and so were the other priests. I think now that, as I look back, Father Shea was such an example in every way. The hot topic of the day was the civil rights issue, and he was so forthright about that. CBS News came down and interviewed him, since the high school was the only one in the former Confederacy desegregated. And I remember the reporter asked him, how many blacks are in your school? And Father Shea said, I have no idea. We don't count them by race.
That's great.
The faculty was composed totally of diocesan priests.
Okay.
No lay people except the coaches, but everything else, whether you went to class in mathematics or history or English or chemistry or whatever, it was taught by a priest.
That was rare at the time, right?
Well, I don't think it would have been rare in the country at the time, because, for example, if you had gone to Brebeuf in Indianapolis, every teacher would have been a Jesuit.
Okay.
And so, because they had so many priests.
Sure.
If you had gone to Benedictine in Richmond, Virginia, where many of my classmates went, every teacher would have been a Benedictine monk.
Okay.
But in any case, now I look at it from another point of view, but I suppose the bishop of Nashville at the time sent the best and the brightest that he had to the high school. I say this all the time. When I was in high school, my heroes were not athletes and popular entertainers, but they were the priests.
Sure.
Two of them became bishops. They were a fine group of men.
Yeah.
So when did I begin to think about being a priest? I don't know. I guess it was more gradual and subtle. But as the years went by, I became involved not only in classes, of course, but I became involved in extracurricular activities and whatever. And would be with the priests in another dimension other than in a classroom setting, and be brought into their ministry in a sense. One of the priests had a weekend assignment, and that was to the Tennessee State Prison for Men. So he would take four of us to the prison occasionally, and they had a dedicated chapel, I remember, St. Dismas Chapel, and he would have Mass, and then there'd be a holy hour. And while in that particular visits, I had a experience with another group of sisters. The issue was that you had to fast from everything, including water, until you received communion. So Mass was there at 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. Well, the prisoners could not go to the mess hall for breakfast because they'd break their fast. The Catholic prisoners could not. So there was an issue. The Daughters of Charity took upon themselves. They would come out to the Mass, and they would bring, I can still taste them, these wonderful, wonderful sweet rolls and donuts and so forth from the hospital kitchen, serve a breakfast to the prisoners.
I know what you're thinking. How dare you cut them off in the middle of the story? Well, you're going to have to listen next week to Flavor of the Week Part 2 with Monsignor Campion. So many stories. It was just amazing. We sat down for like an hour and a half, and he just went from story to story to story to story. So we'll try to connect to this over the course of 4 weeks so you can enjoy a little bit of what is the fabulous life of Monsignor Campion over at Our Sunday Visitor.